Good morning and welcome to the third component of this morning's program, Zionism, Anti-Zionism, and the Aims of Jewish Liberal Education. No doubt the question of Zionism and anti-Zionism, which we've already explored this morning, has deep roots within our movement and certainly within the College Institute. In the 1950s, I was a product of a Reform congregation in Richmond, Virginia, that celebrated its affiliation with the American Council for Judaism and welcomed the anti-Zionist views of its rabbi. Indeed, this is a subject that has deep both emotional and intellectual elements. It is framed in the context of a history of a movement that has grown its Zionism, reshaped it, and carried it forward. To help us explore this question, we have asked Dr. Andrew Rehfeld, the 10th president of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, to address these challenges. Trained as a political scientist, Andrew Rehfeld has had a distinguished academic career at the University of Rochester and University of Chicago, where he studied, and for 18 years is a member of the faculty at Washington University in St. Louis. In 2012, Dr. Rehfeld was appointed the 12th president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of St. Louis. And in December of 2018, Andrew Rehfeld was elected to serve as HUC-JIR's president. He would be the first non-rabbi to hold this position. He has written extensively on some of the questions associated with this issue and the challenges of a new generation of young academic and rabbinic students. We will hear respondents to Dr. Rehfeld following his formal remarks, and we will then, of course, open this conversation to additional questions that will be drawn from your various notes and cards. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Windmueller, and what an honor it is to speak after you are at the podium. Stephen was the head of our School of Jewish Nonprofit Management and a luminary in the field, as I'm sure many of you have read his work. I'm also incredibly humbled to be here with all of you, and again appreciate Ami's leadership in pulling conventions like this together, where substantive issues can be spoken about and disagreements aired so that we can get to the depth of issues. I want to apologize that I have to leave very soon after giving this talk. We have graduation and ordination this week in Cincinnati, and I'll be heading there. In fact, I had invited this conference to come on our campus in Cincinnati so that I could attend the full campus, but the invitation stands for next year, should you want to take advantage of it. My friends, we are living in illiberal times. As the Jewish world transforms quickly around us, the calls by some to adopt political litmus tests for our students by those unsettled by a new generation's views about Israel are not surprising. For historically, at moments of societal transition, even liberal societies feel compelled to erect barriers, and often in the usually vain hope that they will be effective, rather than drive the very behavior and ideas they wish to filter out underground, as they often do. Rather than bar students whose views and choices do not align with ours, I believe we should have confidence in the aims of liberal Jewish education to foster the very dispositions of Ahavat Yisrael that we all share, and make no mistake about that we share, and to cultivate them in a far deeper way than keeping people out or restricting them from ordination can ever do. Confidence in students who care enough about the Jewish people to seek to be our leaders and to choose HUC-JIR, a proudly Zionist institution that for over 50 years has required a year of study in Israel, learning Jewish history, mastering Hebrew, and understanding Israel's complexity. an institution that's committed to the principles of liberal Zionism for the protection and flourishing of the Jewish people and Jewish life, securing democracy and human rights for all who live in the homeland of our people, Israel. The aims of liberal education to foster deep and lasting commitments among our students preparing to serve liberal Jewish communities requires openness for deliberation. We just heard a call that we should only ordain card-carrying Zionists by my friend Ami. I disagree. I recognize that calling oneself an anti-Zionist at this moment can be offensive and provocative. So why should such openness to such views that are counter to the very values we hold, the very values that I've worked certainly for the last 2 decades to pursue, be tolerated at the only liberal seminary to operate its own campus and faculty in Israel? Why should being a Zionist not be a condition of ordination? Because I believe the most effective way to cultivate the dispositions of commitment, love, and care for anything, including the Jewish people in Israel, is to grapple with the strongest arguments for and against a point of view, an environment where they can come to understand on their own terms without threat the reasons why we believe in Zionism, why the Jewish people has a right to live freely in their homeland, and that process cannot be undertaken with any integrity and in any serious way with the threat of expulsion over our students' heads. A commitment to this approach admittedly risks that some may not come to see the world the same way we do. And that, I admit, is a necessary cost of the kind of openness I believe as a liberal seminary is necessary to achieve our shared aims of cultivating Ahavat Yisrael. And we just heard from the Bima, Jonathan Greenblatt, speak. I don't believe he's here anymore, but speak about the need for boundaries. And I want to say, the principles that I'm articulating are not necessarily appropriate for every organization. I think the ADL, if they want to, they should have a boundary about accepting the Abraham Accords as being a good thing. Good for them. I don't know why, Ami, you wouldn't have boundaries for your congregation. You're creating a sacred community. State your principles and kick out members, if that's what you believe, who don't hold your values. It's not how I would run a congregation, but if the point is that these are values tied to the very mission of education that I believe we should be pursuing at a seminary and not necessary for every organization within the Jewish community. So before I turn to some examples, let's consider a statement of principle we might adopt as a prospectus for HUC consistent with this open position. Now listen carefully and let me know what you think. But let me finish, please. Let's imagine this. Quote, "The Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion does not commit its teachers to any special interpretation of Judaism. The different constructions of Judaism and of Jewish life, Orthodox, conservative, liberal, radical, Zionist, and non-Zionist, are expounded to the students in courses given by those representing different points of view. Every member of the teaching staff is free to see and state the truth as they see it, and in the same way, every student is free." So by a show of hands, how many of you think that's a great prospectus for HUC to adopt? Spattering. Thank you, I appreciate that. My friends, let me be clear, I'm not actually proposing that we adopt that. What I just read is the founding prospectus of the Jewish Institute of Religion, articulated by Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, perhaps from this very bema. It remained in place during the quarter century of JIR's existence. The stakes are high today. But are those stakes higher than they were in the 30s and 40s when it remained in place? Again, they are still high. So let me get into some of the arguments that I really appreciate, and the arguments are strong. And again, we are a Zionist institution. I am a proud Zionist, and I do not believe or walk with anti-Zionists, so I understand why people feel so strongly about it. So let me go through some of the arguments. It can be tempting to see all anti-Zionists as radicals, and I want to thank Rabbi Wolpe, who I believe is also not here, but I heard what he had to say. Maybe you'll send him the video. We see them marching in the street, denying the right of Israel to exist, using slogans like "from the river to the sea," that promote ethnic cleansing, promoting violence, calling for Jews to return to Poland, and sometimes even promoting genocide against the Jewish people. The anti-Zionist Hamas slaughtered our people on October 7th. They continue to hold innocent hostages. They terrorize their own people. And they must be held as the primary party responsible for the thousands and thousands of innocent Gazans, their own people, who have died in the horrible war that they initiated. All those things are reprehensible. And so call this a guilt by association argument. If our students choose to describe themselves using labels that genocidal anti-Semites like Hamas use, how on earth can we permit them in our hallways? So let's take that question seriously and ask it of ourselves. If we take the principle that we reject the use of terms that are deployed by violent extremists, we better not call ourselves Zionists. Look at the policies of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Look at the actions of Meir Kahane and the settler Zionists. Look at all of them who are self-declared Zionists who hold the flag of Zionism. Some of them are controlling state power right now. But again, I call myself a proud Zionist, and I'm going to defend that for HUC, because I can differentiate my Zionism from those who mean something different. The Zionism of the kind that we support is the idea that the Jewish people have the right to live freely in their historic homeland, controlling state power for the sake of their self-defense, to advance the flourishing of Judaism and the Jewish people, and in a manner that's limited by democracy and respect for the human rights of all who are subject to its power. All three of those things: self-defense, flourishing, democracy, and human rights. Not one of them, not two of them, but all three. But we recognize that terms like non-Zionist or anti-Zionist, just like Zionist, cover a wide range of views as well. So we have an option. We can turn away and alienate so-called non-Zionists, forcing them to align with the most radical and offensive versions of their views, even as we defend our own right to claim a nuanced approach to the labels we want to use to describe ourselves, or we can find a way to exclude those who promote violent extremism of any kind, whether they call themselves, whatever they call themselves, and remain true to our aims of liberal Jewish education. So let's get into some other examples. John Stuart Mill, the noted political philosopher of the 19th century, also a member of English Parliament, noted that when we don't take dissenting views seriously, we can forget the arguments for the views we believe are true, right, and just. We lose the moorings of them. We leave ourselves open and exposed to obvious arguments. One reason I believe that anti-Zionism is appealing to many of our younger generation, that Ami spoke about at the beginning, is that they come from communities that have not permitted open discussion, to confront the concerns that they have, not in a dismissive way, but say, yeah, you know what, you're right, that's a good question, I don't have the answer. Let's explore it together. For example, we often assert that Israel has the right to exist, or that the Jewish people has a right to live free in their homeland, both of which I've said before, I strongly support, HUC strongly supports, the Reform movement strongly supports. But when people say Israel has the right to exist, it's a complicated political philosophical question. And I think they mean the Jewish people has a right to control state power. And that itself is also a philosophical question. Now, I just heard Jonathan Greenblatt say, we're fighting in the streets. We shouldn't be dealing with philosophy. Well, guess what? The distinctive mission of a seminary is to deal with philosophical argument, to help people think. That's not the right mission for everyone in the streets. So I get it. That's why a different standard for us may be appropriate than for others. But that question of right leads to a whole host of other questions that we want our Jewish leaders, when they get to the streets, to be able to ask and understand, like these. What gives the right of the Jewish people to control state power? Are there limits to that right? And what should happen if they violate that right over an extended period of time? But wait a minute, cries a voice in our community. In fact, I heard somebody say it today. It might have been Rabbi Wolpe. That question is anti-Semitic. Why are you singling out the Jews? And you know the argument. Are the Jewish people simply demanding the very same right that every people enjoys? If that indeed were the case, then any kind of anti-Zionism would be a kind of anti-Semitism by definition. Was that a woo for Oregon? The claim that the Jewish people is simply seeking a right every people enjoys is simply false. There are over 4,000 discernible peoples in the world and only fewer than 200 nations. Do the math. Most individuals live in states that are not ethnic states and not based on peoplehood at all. The US, France, Germany, Italy, India, China, Canada, just to name a few. So here's the question that non-radical anti-Zionists are raising, that our leaders in the field need to be able to answer cogently. Why is the Jewish people one of those extraordinary, unusual cases of a people that does have a right to control state power? If we want our rabbis and cantors and Jewish leaders in the field to be able to answer that question within the liberal communities they operate, we can't give them dogma to recite. We can't demand their compliance as a price of entry or ordination, which they can give just as easily and sincerely as many loyalty oaths are. We need to create the educational space for them to come to that view for themselves, to adhere to it, to love Israel, to love Zionism, that will ground their leadership. Our justification in claiming the control of state power comes not from a non-existent right of every people to control state power. It comes from, among other things, our nearly unique history of thousands of years of persecution, our historical connection to the land and its integral place in our people's narrative. Chaim Gans has a terrific book and terrific approach if you're looking for one along these lines. But to prepare them to lead our communities, it's not enough for our students to understand for themselves why the Jewish people has the right to control power. Let's move to the next one. They must fully appreciate the valid basis and critique of Israel, that having a right to anything is always conditional and limited. State power must first be used to pursue the legitimate conditions for which it was deployed, and then it limited by principles of justice. This is a value not just of liberal Judaism reflected in our prophetic tradition. This is a value of modern moral and political philosophy. Given the actions of the Israeli government over the last 25 years, well before October 7th, and make no mistake, that's all I'm referring to, October 6th and before, it is not unreasonable, ridiculous, or immoral, as it was a year ago asserted from this bema, to question whether the project itself has gone awry. And by the way, I was told that Daniel Hartman and Yehuda Klein Halevi just made the same point on their podcast last week. Don't know if that's true, but it sounds like something they would note. If we cannot recognize that fact and seek to confront these questions directly, then we've lost our claim to being an educational institution at all. So I'll close. It's true that without walls and barriers, some students might get through, making decisions and holding beliefs that are anathema to our values. That indeed is the tension with which we live as liberal Jews in liberal communities. We're not training leaders to go into closed, orthodox communities whose boundaries can be so clearly and neatly policed. As the Israeli political philosopher Yael Yuli Tamir has observed, if we wish to respect individuals as the authors of their own lives, we must accept that some of their choices will seem to us less valuable than others. We too will have to accept that some of the choices our students and alumni make, even after they go through an open environment of embracing the arguments that resonate for them after an open series of questions and exploration, that those choices may seem less valuable than others. And I dare say that they will view some of our choices as less valuable as we believe they once were, and sometimes we will come to agree with them, though I don't believe on this one at all. So make no mistake, in any case, they will feel the consequences of having positions that they label anti-Zionist. They will suffer the consequences of petitions signed and statement made, for they live on the internet forever. And our students that have signed statements and letters that I have viewed offensive, obnoxious, and contrary to our interests have faced challenging experience on the job market. So again, congregations should impose litmus tests all they want and set their values and set their standards, and our students need to know what they are. We can react to our students, but if we meet what we think is extremism with extremism of our own, we will not only leave them to the radicals, we will betray the sacred aims of liberalism and liberal Jewish education that I believe are, have been, and must remain at the core of the reform movement. By failing to create the very environment necessary to cultivate Ahavat Yisrael in its deepest sense. As Rabbi Shirley Wise, the author of the definitive history of JIR, has described, Stephen S. Wise was passionate about this open approach. He hired non-Zionists onto the faculty, awarded honorary degrees to non-Zionists, and invited non-Zionists to speak from the Free Synagogue pulpit, as well as Zionists, of course. JIR attracted a Zionist student body of diverse political orientations, but for the students too, as the prospectus stipulates, Wise was committed to academic freedom and freedom of the pulpit. I'm not proposing that we do any of those things. I am proposing that the aims of liberal Jewish education to help people understand the reasons for their most important commitments require the same freedom and openness of education, free from the threat of being expelled, expressed by a founder of our institution, a founder of this very congregation. It's a commitment to those aims that we must not abandon, particularly at a time of war and growing illiberalism, for the sake of our mission, the sake of our people, and I believe the sake of our world. Thank you.
To respond to Dr. Rehfeld, we've invited two of our colleagues, Rabbi Geri Newburge, who is the rabbi of Philadelphia's Mainline Reform Congregation, a graduate of HUC Cincinnati, who has previously served as the associate rabbi of Temple Emmanuel of Cherry Hill. Prior to coming to the College Institute, Rabbi Newburge studied at the University of Miami and at the Claremont School of Theology. Rabbi Tarlan Rabizadeh holds a degree in political science with a minor in Hebrew studies from Boston University. She's the graduate of both HUC's School of Education in Los Angeles and our rabbinic program at HUC in New York. Tarlan is vice president today of the University of Judaism, the American Jewish University, and her assignment is the Director for Jewish Engagement and Outreach. Tarlan has served as well as Director of Jewish Life at UCLA and as the Jewish Emergent Network Fellow at the Kitchen in San Francisco. So I invite everyone, all three of you, to join me. I think the best way to begin is, frankly, to respond directly to Andrew's premise that HUC's boundaries may be different than what maybe congregations, other movements, and other seminaries may invoke. So to Tarlan and to Geri, where do you stand, or where do you sort of position yourself with regard to the question of Andrew's notions of doing away with such boundaries?
As you so graciously gave us our introduction, Stephen, I studied at Claremont School of Theology before I attended Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and I had a professor there who insisted that we constantly go to the dictionary to look up the definition of a word or a term to ensure that we were indeed talking about the very same idea or principle, and it is a practice that I have continued. And so I struggle deeply with some of the terminology that we use, and I struggle very much with this idea of the values and principles we are setting forth as a seminary that I am a proud graduate of, with the reality of what a congregational rabbi is. And like many of us, I think we want to have our cake and eat it too. And as I made the transition from my master's degree at Claremont to my entry into Hebrew Union College, I can't help but return to my application process. Now, it was a long time ago, and I don't know how much of it is still part of the course of admissions at HUC, but it was a lengthy application with multiple essays. There was a psychological evaluation, and there was a Hebrew test. To me, all of those mean that HUC-JIR had standards. I would not have been admitted if my essays were not interesting or compelling or well-written. I would not have been admitted if my grade point average was not sufficient or my letters of recommendation were not up to snuff. And in fact, and it is shameful for me to admit this on this FEMA, I was in fact given a conditional acceptance. My Hebrew, to this day, again shameful for me to admit on this FEMA, is atrocious. So when I applied to HUC, I did not pass the Hebrew test, and I was told, you have a year to study and prepare. You'll retake the Hebrew test, and if you do not pass it the second time, you will have to reapply. That was not an ideal option, and as we all know, God works in mysterious ways, so fortunately I passed it the second go-round, then matriculated, where I met my husband, and fast forward now to today, where I have been ordained for 21 years, 19 of which I've served as a congregational rabbi. And so I am growing deeply concerned about this term litmus test. I think there's something inherent to it that stokes the fires of reinforcing the differences that we have. I think as a liberal Jewish community, as a Reformed Jewish community, it is very fair to speak of standards and what are standards in order to uphold the mission and vision of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. And anticipating our conversation today, I went to the website. And so if we go to the website and we look at what is articulated as our mission and vision, and in addition, much of which includes the Year in Israel program and the principles which we have for that experience, I find it deeply concerning that we would have anti-Zionists in our midst. And you rightly point out that HUC is a Zionist organization, which of course begs the question of why would an anti-Zionist want to be a part of a Zionist organization? And so I'm still scratching my head over that, and that is because I occupy a very different position than you do, and you are able to engage in some of those conversations in a way that I have not had the opportunity. But I think we can have standards and uphold our liberal values of liberal Judaism and still say to somebody, this maybe is not the place for you.
The question is, how do I feel about no boundaries? It scares me. I mean, it really scares me. I think that, going back to my own essay question of getting into rabbinical school, the options were, and I don't think they're the options anymore, it was something about write about God, Israel, or Torah. And I think I talked about it here, that I wrote about Israel, and I had, a few members of the board tell me, if I were you, I would rewrite this. And I said, why? I'm writing about Am Yisrael, I'm not even talking about politics, and they're like, just listen to me. If you want to get into HUC, just steer clear, talk about God, just don't talk about Israel. And when I got in, I understood why. It was really challenging to be there and have views that, as a daughter of immigrants, were pretty common amongst the Persian community. I mean, Israel saves the Jews in the Middle East. Israel is great. It's not, and there's an intifada, and we're going to pray for the Palestinian children, but I'm not allowed to talk about Israel or have an Israeli flag in the Beit Midrash, which I know I've brought up, but it was I was jolted. I suddenly, some kind of core understanding of Judaism was shaken for me. And so I think back to being in rabbinical school and being ordained in 2018, and now thinking about kind of opening the gates to more of, I don't want to say different viewpoints, but just really challenging viewpoints. So I hear you as an educator. As an educator, when I'm in a classroom, I love when my students are like, "But Rabbi, do you believe in God? I don't get it. What's your..." And I love that they don't know. And we're making rabbis, and they end up having to do things in the world. And one of the things that I do at the American Jewish University, the largest part of my portfolio is that I convert students. I'm part of the RA's endorsed conversion program. And if you've only known, what is happening in class with genocide and apartheid, and forget about the students, the teachers calling me and saying, "Rabbi Tarlan, can you please sub my class on Israel? I can't teach that topic this year." So that's where my head is. It's not how great it is to be in a classroom and discuss different viewpoints, although I would be afraid maybe to be in some of those things. But I do think about the rabbis and who they will become in the world. And I don't want those rabbis teaching my conversion students, if I can be honest.
I wouldn't want those rabbis teaching your conversion students either. Excuse me? Thank you I feel like I'm at a Baptist church. Thank you. That is one option, and don't ordain them. And let's remove their smicha when they make a question that's threatening to us as well. And let's create barriers so that we're carrying narrow and narrow communities. We have a mission, and our mission is not to recruit anti-Zionists. We're not interested in recruiting anti-Zionists. We're interested in saying we are a Zionist institution. You're not going to be able to study here if you don't spend a year in Israel. You're not going to be able to spend a year in Israel if you don't engage with our new dean that we just appointed, Nachman Shai, the former... If you're Zionist and not clapping for Nachman Shai, you don't know who Nachman Shai is. The former minister of the diaspora, a member of parliament, spokesperson for the IDF for much of his career. And these are the commitments that we make to strengthen Zionism within the institution. So let's not change or alter because I'm saying something that may produce something that is discomforting. Let's not change that to say suddenly I'm saying, yeah, come anti-Zionists into HUC. I'm not. But I am saying that if we don't have an open environment, that we're not going to create the conditions for which they can own and accept Zionism on their own terms, Tarlan, in as free a way as possible. And I want to come back to your experience in just a moment. But Geri, you mentioned if you have values, you need boundaries around it. I believe JTS still has I think 10 or 12 requirements, and you have to sign that you will keep Shabbat this way, and Torah and ritual. And we have the same thing except without the requirements. You have to adopt a practice of Torah study outside of your classes. You have to adopt a ritual practice and living a life of the calendar. This is also on the website. I'm impressed you found anything on our website, although it is better than it used to be. Number 3, you have to adhere to a standard of what has been called menschlichkeit. These are some of the standards, the labels that were there before I started. Ethics and a high level of ethics. You have to study in Israel and cultivate a love of the Jewish people in Israel. And you have to commit to the Jewish home and family. Now, only one of those do we have any kind of enforcement around. and that's that you can't marry or be engaged with a non-Jew. That's the only thing that's it. We don't have enforcement around that. So if we're going to be serious about putting enforcements, prohibitions, and requirements, let's not just stop at Zionism. Let's start it. You have to engage in Torah study, and this is how many says Torah study. That's it. Okay, that's right. You could, if that's the kind of environment you want for students to cultivate for themselves. They do, however, sign a contract that they will be engaged in that kind of work. But the last thing I'll say about requirements, Zionism is an idea. Zionism is a set of ideas that people have to believe. So in addition to that, let's set out which version of God you think they should believe, and let's require them to sign on to that. Let's sign on to the other kind of political commitments that they ought to have. I just think it creates an illiberal atmosphere that at this moment we need to state our values, teach to them, and promote them as the best way of producing the very Zionist rabbis that we want to produce.
So, Andrew, the questions that have come in so far are directed to you principally, as you could well imagine. And they all deal with the question of standards or requirements. For example, do you hire members of the faculty who might be anti-Zionists? And what kind of teaching ought to be sort of defined as appropriate at a seminary? And other additional themes here include the notion of, are there other standards we should consider, or are you open, for example, to folks who we would ordain who might be a Jew for Jesus, or referencing other forms of beliefs or lack of beliefs? So in each of these kinds of questions, the issues all assert the question of how far does one go in creating or the open door policy versus some standards of acceptance.
No, I appreciate that, and that's the logical question that follows. And we have no prohibition in place that you'll find against Jews for Jesus, and we would never admit a Jew for Jesus, because you can have standards and you can apply them without having the formal prohibition there that shuts down debate. We only admit Jews and Jews of a certain kind, not for Jesus. To the best of my knowledge, we don't hire anti-Zionists to the faculty, but that's the provost's area. So, but I wouldn't support it. I don't think I differ from Stephen Wise in that way. I think that we ought to be promoting and teaching about a love of Israel, cultivating Ahavat Yisrael, and Zionism. So of course we have standards. The question is not, do we have standards? It's not how we value them. It's how do we implement them and how do we inspire people to live by them?
I'm really struggling with this idea of non-Zionist and anti-Zionist, because to go back to my opening statement about how do we define these terms, and I literally did this, non is you're still open to the possibility, essentially. Anti means you are fundamentally against. And I struggle with this idea of being fundamentally against the concept of Zionism. We, as Reform Judaism, have struggled with many, many societal issues over centuries. Interfaith marriage is one example that comes to mind. I understand the consideration of admitting students who struggle with the concept of Zionism, because they are trying to look at it from various vantage points and reconcile the challenges that are reality, that I think we would all acknowledge in this room, with the ideal that we all wish was the Jewish state and the Jewish people. It's hard for me to understand why someone who is fundamentally against Jewish statehood in whatever manifestation they believe it to be would, in this day and age, be able to understand and serve a Reform Jewish community. As a congregational rabbi,
I agree with that.
Good. I'll just say, and then we can let
Well,
John.
you agree with that, but you want to...
Can I make it clear?
Yeah.
I think anybody that came into an admissions committee, and I haven't sat on an admissions committee, but I'm rather sure and said, I'm an anti-Zionist, I don't believe Israel has a right to exist, you would say, thank you, you're in the wrong place. Period. And that is the point. It's not that, right? But the question, the assertion that's been made is not at the admissions point, because it's not a good fit. I've already told you that's our values. I've already told you the year in Israel. You know that. It's a question of where does liberalism as an ideal fit in your concept of liberal Judaism. And the standard was at ordination. We should not be ordaining anti-Zionist rabbis, was, I think, Ani, what you had said. And that's what I'm pushing back on. Because if you say at the end of this pathway, you come to a different view, and you can't say you're a Zionist and sign on the piece of paper, we will not ordain you. Well, you're not actually, I get it. We're not actually creating the conditions within to struggle with and to think through. Has this been? Thank you. To struggle with and think through the fundamental commitments that we need to develop.
So there's certain kinds of anti-Zionists we don't let in. So can you just give me a rundown of sort of the spectrum of what
Anyone who said in a committee, I'm an anti-Zionist, I don't believe Israel has a right to exist, I do not believe would be admitted. I would be opposed to admitting them into HUC.
So
anyone who said, Zionism, you mean what Ben Gvir and Smotrich do? I'm against that. I'm an anti-Zionist. Then we have a conversation. Because I bet most of you in this room are anti-Zionists if that's what Zionism means. In fact, I think that is anti-Zionism of its worst form, because their positions have made the Jewish people less safe. They have narrowed the conception of Judaism, not allowed it to flourish in the state of Israel, and they have pursued a violation of democracy and human rights, the three principles that I believe are core to liberal Zionism. I think they are the anti-Zionists.
And I think that we would agree with you, but I think that some of this feels like a very academic pursuit, which is important, but it can't be the definition of who we are. And just as we acknowledge that there are multiple ways to have a meaningful Jewish life, the Orthodox rabbis in my community aren't sitting down and breaking bread with me on Shabbos. And we would say that's a problem, although we heard beautifully from Eden before about the kind of Jewish community that has been built at Columbia since October 7th. And so in this firestorm, we have been able to find new opportunities to grow as a community. And I think ultimately that's what you're trying to say, is that in this firestorm of what does it mean to be a Zionist or an anti-Zionist, we need to keep the lines of communication open, which we should always do as a Jewish community. But I think that anyone who proclaims as an anti-Zionist, especially right now, sets us up for it lays down a red line that is very difficult to cross. And maybe it's crossable in academia, but it is very difficult to cross in a day-to-day congregational rabbi's life.
it's, I think, Andrew named it. It's really, it's kind of triggering, actually, to be talking about this in this time. I think I want to, the God example of like how people feel about God, I mean, that's not a litmus test in itself. We have plenty of Reform rabbis that don't believe in God, and I have my own problems with that. But still, I mean, God is like, if you meet God, give him my phone number because I have a couple questions about God. I mean, that's different. The question about I don't know. It's just. I think it kind of, it goes back to, the wicked child in the Haggadah. It says in the Torah, if I can, be a rabbi over here. It says in the Torah that if your child should one day ask, why are we doing this Passover stuff? You tell him or her, that God let us out, and then what happens? The rabbis put that child in the Haggadah as the wicked child, and then add a couple other guys in there too, right? But the wicked child is wicked because he says anti. He says, why do you people do that, right? You think about the Seder that goes on for 4 hours, and it's like, why are we doing this? When is this over already? Why are you guys making me do this? That's what I feel about this anti-situation. It's not, forget about labels. Let's just take a lesson from Gen Z. Don't call me he, she, I'm they. Don't call me names. Okay, fine. The content of it is anti you people. And that is not a seat of, I don't want to walk into HUC as a student and fight every day. Or to think to myself, there's going to be, that kid is going to be yelling at me if I bring this up in sermon class. It's not fun.
Tarlan, and you've explained your own experience, which I said last year is reprehensible that happened to you, because that can't happen to you, that shouldn't happen to you, and any teacher that did that to you or that didn't police the class was not creating the kind of environment that I've just been describing. Anyone that wants to promote a strong, a muscular kind of Zionism, or any kind of Zionism, needs to be able to express it without ridicule.
My pushback is, can I push back? My pushback
versus what you, no, go ahead.
My pushback is, in practice, I agree with you. I mean, in theory. In practice, I don't think you're going to be able to monitor that. I think you'd be surprised. I will not name who this person was, Zichrono Livracha. He was a pillar of Reform Judaism. I mean, Jonathan Greenback talked about how we've always had Zion in the Torah. We haven't always had Zion, Andrew, in Reform Sidurim. It has been taken out. So I'm just putting it out there that,
Tarlan, which is why we lead strongly with Zionism as our value, which is why we lead strongly with the kind of Zionism we believe. I go back to the appointment of our new dean. Even the last dean, Nama Kelman, Michael Marmer, these were strong, committed Zionists that are at the core of our institution. David Ellenson, Zichrono Livracha, Aaron Pankin, Zichrono Livracha. These were people that committed to Zionism and the project. That's not going to change for HUC. It is a philosophical question, because we are promoting the kind of environment for education where these philosophical questions have to be answered.
Let me just ask one quick question I saw. Let's say we let someone in who completely changes their views on Zionism and actually becomes an anti-Zionist, the kind that you wouldn't want admitted in the first place. And they go out in the world and they start communities that really talk about how the destruction of Israel is good. Is that good? I mean,
that's terrible. That's terrible. No, I agree. I'll clap for that. That's terrible. Let's be clear. After they leave HUC, we have zero control over what they do. The anti-Zionist rabbis that are out there, that are graduates of HUC, they weren't anti-Zionists when they came into HUC. Not the ones that I knew. Maybe, okay, the ones that I know. The ones that are doing things that I find reprehensible in their politics or their, right? People change over their 50-year career, God willing. And there's only so much we can do. And if we try to fight every single fight through prohibition and by requirements, we're going to lose the essence of who we are as a liberal educational institution. That's all I'm saying.
The remaining questions are all directed to Andrew, so he will have a chance to answer them individually at some future point.
Just very quickly, listen, I so am grateful to Geri and Tarlan for your feedback, and all of you for the input. This is not an easy time, and I hope that we can maintain the kind of civil discourse, even around an agreement, and understand our shared commitment to Zionism, to a Jewish homeland, to Jewish control of state power, for our own defense, the flourishing of Israel, even as we are pursuing a justice and liberation movement when we do so.
I want to thank Andrew, and certainly to each of you, Tarlan and Geri, for this rather provocative and thoughtful discussion. I think we're headed for lunch. Are there any particular instructions regarding lunch at this moment?
The tab on.